We share these streets, true tales of everyday folk in bygone Nottingham. Episode 8. Willie. The Victorian era is considered by many the period of most significant invention and innovation in Britain. Queen Victoria's reign from the 20th of June 1837 to the 22nd of January 1901 heralded huge changes in medicine, science, technology, religious attitudes, social values, architecture, foreign and domestic policies and art, among others. In many ways it was the start of what we'd consider the modern world. But whilst some innovations have died away and the sun has thankfully gone down on the British Empire, one Victorian innovation has continued to thrive and in fact gone from strength to strength. That's association football. The Football Association was formed in 1863 in an effort to make the rules of football consistent. Previously, a number of different sets of rules prevailed, which were largely the product of public schools. Two of the most widespread were the Cambridge rules, which were published in 1848, and the Sheffield rules, used by a number of clubs up north from the 1850s. Had you gone to a football match before the FA took charge, you'd have witnessed something that was a cross between modern rugby and modern football, with players charging about, sometimes with the ball in their hands, and regularly booting each other in the shins. It was after 1863 that we have the distinction between rugby and soccer. Although many people mock the word soccer for apparently being an American term, it's actually Victorian English and is short for association football. It was used to distinguish the new FA rules and the other rules, including rugby, which to this day is still formally called rugby football. Once the rules were formalised and a national organisation existed, the sport attracted more fans and players across the country. Here in Nottingham, many local teams were formed, often structured around workplaces. 2 years after the FA's formation in 1865, a number of shinty players met at a pub called the Clinton Arms on Shakespeare Street. The pub's still there in 2021 at the junction with South Sherwood Street at 38 Shakespeare Street. At the time of recording it's called the Playwright. The shinty players decided to swap the hockey-like game they currently played for association football and decided they'd wear Garibaldi red. The initial seeds of Nottingham Forest had been planted. 7 years after the formation of Forest, in 1872, there was a marriage in Radford, Nottingham, between a couple named George and Julia. 3 years later they were living in Lenton, and Julia gave birth to a son, William. In 1881 we traced them to 62 Park Street in Lenton. Park Street back then was very different to the modern one, which wriggles, turns and kinks. The original Park Street was dead straight and connected directly with Park Road to the south. At Park Street, George worked as a leather dresser and Julia as a silk winder. 10 years later finds the family at 9 Forster Street in Radford. Number 9 looks like it no longer exists and in 2021 is on the site of the Sutton House complex on the west side of Forster Street. In 1891 William, then 17, was also listed as a leather dresser. Outside of work he was developing a keen interest in soccer, athletics and cricket. At an amateur level he played for local football clubs like Notts Olympic, Sutton in Ashfield, Newstead Byron and Hucknall Portland. In 1896 though, William, nicknamed Willie, got a big break when he joined Nottingham Forest. Willie's position is listed as wing half, which at the time seemed to mean a wide midfielder, though the duties and roles of player positions then bear little relation to the sport we're familiar with now. His debut was against Liverpool on the 28th of November 1896. 1898 was an eventful year for Willie. He married his sweetheart Alice, and their first daughter Regina was born. The same year, with Willie in midfield, Forest reached their first ever FA Cup final after beating Grimsby Town, Gainsborough Trinity, West Brom and Southampton. In an intriguing twist of fate, the other finalists were Derby County. Forest were very much the underdogs, having been beaten twice by the Rams that season. At Derby's baseball ground, they'd lost 5-0. The team photos confusingly show Forest wearing Derby County's strip, since the now famous Garibaldi red would be too dark for photographs. In the modern age, this would surely be considered treasonous by both sets of supporters. Just over 62,000 spectators watched the match held at Crystal Palace Stadium in South London. Willie's impact was felt very early on. In the 19th minute he took a free kick from the left and got the ball to teammate Arthur Capes, who shot through a crowd of players and scored. Capes won a bicycle for scoring first in the final. Derby's Steve Bloomer equalised in the 31st, but Capes got his second just before half-time to make it 2-1 to Forest. Willie picked up an injury, and in those days there were no substitutes. In fact, there weren't even shin pads, so he had to remain on the pitch and just do his best to contribute however he could. Derby put intense pressure on the Forest goal all through the second half to no avail, and in the 86th minute Scotsman John McPherson put the result beyond doubt. It ended 3-1 to Forest. The heroes that day were Dan Alsop in goal, Archie Ritchie, Adam Scott, Captain Frank Foreman, John McPherson, William Wragg, that's our Willie, Tom McInnes, Charlie Richards, Len Benbow, Arthur Capes and Alf Spouncer. The club secretary at the time was Harry Hallam. Willie had got the assist in the first goal in Forest's first FA Cup final that resulted in their first FA Cup. For the club it was truly a historic involvement. The fact that it was against Derby made it all the sweeter. Then, as now, a footballer's life could be nomadic. For the elite top achievers it's a life of luxury, but further down the ladder, although still well paid, it can be unsettling for families with regular moves to new clubs. This was true for Willie's family. After 48 appearances for Forest, he moved in 1899 to Leicester Fosse. This club had been founded in 1884 and was so named because they played on a field near Fosse Road. In 1919 they changed their name to Leicester City, and as most people know are still going, and indeed thriving, at the top flight of English football today. Willie was Leicester's free kick specialist, and made 50 appearances for them in 2 seasons. In 1901 we found mention of him living at 59 Hazel Street in Leicester, and listed as a machine builder. Professionalism in football had only been legal in England since July 1885. Many players still worked a job as well as playing regularly, since it was at that time a non-traditional career with a high chance of injury. In 1901 Willie spent just 1 season at Small Heath, which became the modern Birmingham City. He was only given 1 appearance due to the form of the team's existing midfield dynamo George Adey. In the following 5 years Willie struggled to find the excitement of his earlier career, despite spells with Watford, Hinkley Town, Chesterfield Town, Accrington Stanley, Doncaster Rovers and Brighton and Hove Albion. His professional career ended in 1906. Football careers are famously short, and in Willie's time were not as well rewarded as nowadays, so when his playing days ended he needed to find another way to make ends meet. By 1906 Willie and Alice had 3 daughters, so it was no time to rest on his laurels as the breadwinner. We don't know exactly how it happened, but around 1906, Willie met entertainment entrepreneur Fred Karno. Karno is widely regarded as the inventor of slapstick comedy, and the person who brought it to the masses in the Victorian music halls. He'd been born in Exeter in 1866, but his family moved to Sneinton in Nottingham when he was very young. If we could somehow travel back in time and see a Fred Karno show, we'd recognise it as the form that went on to become silent cinema, with custard pies being splattered into people's faces, and oversized policemen trying and failing to catch nimble and quick-thinking hobos. One famous comedy sketch of Karno's was called The Football Match, and it featured former professional players. This is how Willie got his break into show business. He became part of Fred Karno's army as the travelling troupe of performers became known. They performed in music halls all over Britain. The actors in the football match would play matches against local teams as they toured to publicise the shows. For Willie, who'd already travelled the length and breadth of the country, it must have been nice to revisit old teammates and possibly play against them in the publicity matches. A performer who joined Karno's army around the same time as Willie was Sidney, and in 1908 he secured an audition in the shows for his younger brother. The pale, sullen-looking youth was given a 2-week trial, and on stage transformed into a charismatic performer who mesmerised audiences. He became part of the football match sketch, and so was a teammate of Willie's. His name was Charlie Chaplin. Karno was slowly building a successful entertainment business, and an opportunity arose to send a touring company to the States. The young Charlie Chaplin was among the exports, along with his understudy, Stan Jefferson, who would later be known around the world as Stan Laurel. Willie stayed in Britain, and we found that by 1911 he was back in Lenton, living with Alice's parents at White House on Spring Close, a site that's now occupied by the Queen's Medical Centre. The census lists him as a professional athlete at that time. It seems his time in football and showbiz had given Willie a taste for travelling where work presented itself, and by 1915 he was living up in Edinburgh, where he worked as a cricket coach. Alice and Willie had a son, William Jr., in 1912, and added to the ranks with their final offspring, Norman, in 1915. There was a spell in Gravesend, Kent, before the family returned to Nottingham. Willie's FA Cup winners' medal is still in the family and now looked after by his granddaughter Diane. He passed away in 1950, aged 76, but what a life Willie led. A career as a professional footballer as the sport was in its infancy, travelling all over Britain, an FA Cup winner, and a time in showbiz working with Charlie Chaplin, Stan Laurel and Fred Karno. He was a Radford lad, a Nottingham local, and in terms of fresh thinking and innovation, Willie absolutely encapsulated the Victorian era he'd been born into. Who are they?